When a course is offered entitled Homosexuality and it is taught in a frank, open manner, it can cause controversy. Here in the studio, Coast Watch reporter Marni Eton interviews the instructor for this class. Marni?
With so many diverse opinions in today's society, there's much controversy in the area of sex education. While some feel it should be taught in the home, others see the need to bring it into the classroom. Here at Orange Coast College, a course is offered that addresses the issues concerning sex education. With me today is Mr. Jim Kowalski, an Orange Coast College psychology professor and also a therapist in his private practice. Hi Jim, welcome to Coast Watch.
Hi Marni, thank you.
Human sexuality is a subject that covers many issues. What is it exactly that you teach throughout your course?
Well, I teach much more than issues. I think there are a lot of issues surrounding it. But in the class in human sexuality, I cover all the ways we're sexual beings, as males or females, from birth until death. The science of psychology itself is about 100 years old, a little more. And we don't know everything about that at all yet. And we know even less about human sexuality. That's only been studied now for about 35 years. We just recently, in the last few years, for example, confirmed that a part of the anatomy, the Grafenberg spot on the female, exists, and it was confirmed in very recent years. So there's a lot to learn. But I think most importantly, we as a culture are very conservative, and we picked up a lot of the traits of Victorian England, and it's really good for us to dispel the myths or the kind of bad name that the study of human sexuality has. We're sexual from birth. It's a part of our self-concept. It's a part of our self-esteem. It's a part of our worth as a person, and we certainly ought to study it. The first research was done by a man who taught animal husbandry at Indiana University named Alfred Kinsey. And a student of his joked about doing a research paper on human reproductive sexuality, and the class laughed as though, what do we need to learn about that? They were doing doctoral theses on earthworms reproduction, on cattle. When the student seriously looked into doing it on humans, there was no research to be found. So we've never looked at human behavior until very recently, about 35 years ago or so, when Kinsey started doing his research. I think it's very important for individuals who are going to be healthy, and I teach classes in healthy personality, and I'm also a therapist, as you mentioned. And it's very important to me that people feel very good about themselves. And it's really difficult to separate their sense of who they are as a male or a female, and to have a negative notion of that, and to still feel good about themselves as a person. Because certainly our sexuality is a part of our very being. It's a part of our personality. Girls behave differently than boys, and men differently than women. Mm-hmm. And we ought to be really mutually accepting of these unique differences in both of us, and also mutually understanding, so we can be more compassionate, more understanding, mm-hmm. more sensitive.
Jim, I understand that you're getting some negative feedback from members of the community. Could you tell me what exactly they're objecting to?
Actually, I haven't had any personally, Marni. There was an article in the school newspaper a few years ago by a man who used to teach construction technology here, who is now a pastor at one of the local churches, I believe. And he was gravely concerned. He suggested that we're encouraging promiscuous sex behavior and a whole lot of other things for which there's absolutely no basis, and I do mean absolutely no basis. In follow-up studies of high schools in the nation, including Washington, D.C., where the first high school had sex education, every follow-up survey and study has found that the students who take human sexuality have better relationships. They know more about intimacy. They are much less sexually promiscuous. They have fewer STDs for those who are sexually active, and there are far fewer pregnancies because they know what causes pregnancy, you know what time of the month, and they understand more about birth control. So it's really ungrounded. The people who are most afraid of it, I think, stem from some sort of conservative thinking. I believe it's related to ignorance. I honestly do. I think if they knew what's really taught on a day-in, day-out basis in human sexuality class, they wouldn't panic or get excited or afraid the way they do. So I really see that as a basis of a prejudice, and that is the fear or the ignorance of what really takes place. And I can't imagine anything more sound than studying human sexuality, again, since we're all sexual beings.
Okay. Why do you feel it's necessary to teach the diversities of your course?
Because we're a diverse society, for one. For example, one of the units that I cover, and it doesn't get any more or less coverage than the other units, is on homosexuality. Now, homosexuality has been with humans and every other animal species since the beginning of time. There are those who would just as soon pretend that it doesn't exist. or to say that since it's not God's word, however they interpret God's words, I'm not sure, but because it, in their mind, isn't God's word, therefore it doesn't exist. But the fact is, it does exist, and about 10% of our population is homosexual. I think in every extended family where there are 10 people or more, there's bound to be one, because it's 10% of our population. So I think if we can understand more about people, we'd be less afraid of them. There were so many myths about homosexuals. There are even myths about what their sexual practices are. There's a great deal of misunderstanding about that. There's a great misunderstanding or misinterpretation of their motives. Why would they want to know me? Because if they're of the same sex as me, wouldn't they want to pick up on me? It's really nonsense. They're just like you and me or any other person who happens to be heterosexual, and of course that's an assumption on my part about you or anybody else for that matter. They're like us in every way, shape, and form, with the exception of the little bit of time they spend in the actual practice of sex behavior. I certainly wouldn't want to be judged as a person for something I do in 2% of my time. I would much rather be judged as a person in terms of how fair I am, what I contribute to society, do I care about my fellow man, do I make a good contribution to my close friends, to my family, and I do all of those things, and to the extent to which I do them, I'm very proud. If I happen to be homosexual, it would be an outrage for me to be discounted as a person and discounted in any sense of my personal worth because of something I do with about 2% of my time. And so it's terribly unfair, like most prejudices are. I think societies look for scapegoats. Historically, we've looked for scapegoats. When Germany was doing very poorly, Hitler was able to lead them to find the scapegoat of the Jews, to persecute them for the problems in the society, which were really caused by Germany's problems from World War I. Yeah. Our society is undergoing a great deal of stress right now. My concern, grave concern, is that prejudice against homosexuals or any other minority or potentially Middle Easterners, as it happened for a while during the Middle East War, where anybody who was from the Middle East, it didn't matter what country, or even if they were Iraqis in this country, it didn't matter if they supported Saddam Hussein, they received some persecution and prosecution that was unfair. So when societies are under stress, they do look for scapegoats, and I'm concerned. I think sex education is a scapegoat.
And what do you think is the most important thing a person can learn from taking a human sexuality course such as yours?
Well, they can learn all about themselves as a sexual being, because as a male or a female from conception, we're sexual. Infants' genitals are fully functioning, so they are a sexual being in a real true sense. Males don't look like females at all, even from birth. And as we grow up, we learn what things are okay for girls and what things are okay for boys. Basically, males, we have kind of a double standard, as you may know, in our society, and males somehow get away with, if you will, more behaviors that are typical of a sexual person, of a person who is sexual, than females do. If females do something, they might get a label as a bad person, and for a male, he might be considered a good person. A pretty big departure in perceptions. I would like people to be healthy about who they are, as a male, as a female. And I'd like them to know what makes a good relationship, because I don't talk about just sex behavior per se. I talk about all the ways that we're sexual. It has to do with our different perceptions of the world, with our different perceptions of the other person, of a male perceiving his wife or his girlfriend, a female perceiving her boyfriend or her husband. And we can understand more about each other's perceptions of the other. And that facilitates and fosters a better relationship. I think it helps with more intimacy, more honesty, more mutual understanding. And it really is a very positive thing for humans in general.
Great. Well, thank you, Jim, for joining us. Hopefully we've cleared up some of the misconceptions concerning this course of study and its educational approach. This has been Marni Eton with a look at Coast Education.
That's all for this edition of Coast Watch. I'm Tiffany Leader.
And I'm Tim Hensley.